Hi, all, and welcome back to our show. This is episode 1. This is Jill Bartholomew. I am a iron distance triathlete and coach and owner of Be Fierce Multisport. And I'm here with Troy Theodosio, who is a friend that I've been fortunate enough to make acquaintance with over the last year. And he's going to be my co-host for a while. We're going to talk today about a number of topics, but it's all going to be focused on the road to world championships at Nice last year and the experiences that I had there.
100%. And Jill, before we dive into race day, let's rewind. Take us through your journey and how you got there.
So it was a long journey, but not as long as you would think. I raced a few 70.3s before that, a couple Olympics, couple sprints. I've only been racing in triathlon for about 3 years now. And, I got it in my head. I'm like, 25th anniversary of the Lake Placid race is coming up. I'm going to race it in Lake Placid. I'm from upstate New York originally. And I'm like, that has to be, one that's on my list. I have to race that one. So I trained for about 9 months specifically for that race. I learned a lot about myself. One, like, how do you fit like iron distance level training into an executive schedule? At the time, I was an executive at a Fortune 10 company, very busy schedule just on that. And, at the time, a single mama too. So, that just adds to everything. And, then, you learn like how to swim. I'm an adult onset swimmer. I was competent enough to make it across the pool, make it through these distances, but I'm the type of person that, when you decide to do something, your goal is not just to cross the finish line, right? My goal was to cross the finish line, qualify for world championships, and go to world championships. And so I trained for that, right? I learned how to crush the swim, and at least as I defined it, which has evolved since then. I learned that the bike is actually my strongest sport. When I started out on this journey, I was a runner. And I got into triathlon because I had fractured my femur and started taking up swimming and cycling as we rehabbed that. And my coach at the time was like, "Hey, why don't you take a stab at a triathlon now that you got all the sports?"
Yeah.
So that was kind of how I got to Lake Placid. I think I was training an average of probably 11 to 13 hours a week. So it wasn't like outrageous, but big enough that's like it's kind of a part-time job, and it becomes part of your lifestyle and part of your identity. And they say, like, how do you know a triathlete? Because they tell you, and that's true, because it's becomes such a huge part of your life.
Yeah. Well, you certainly covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time. And then what's so profound about your journey is the fact that you took an injury, and it was almost a blessing in disguise, because from the injury, having been a runner most of your life, you became a triathlete, which is pretty awesome.
Oh my God. Yeah. It was like one of those things that, I had heard of triathlon. One of my physical therapists, I went to one of those, places where they stretch you out, assisted stretching.
Yeah.
And, there's a chain that, down here that's kind of all over. And I went there, and she, my person was doing like sprints, and she was, at the time I was doing like marathons and dopey, all the Disney races and stuff. And she was like, "Oh, I can never do a marathon." And I had no idea what a triathlon was. And she's like, "Oh, well, you swim and you bike and you run." And I'm like, that sounds awful.
Yeah.
And here I
Yeah.
am.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, let's talk about having qualified. Did you feel that you needed to change your approach with regards to your training? Obviously, you're aware of the physical demands of Ironman's Nice in France. Did you feel like you needed to make any major changes?
So I learned a lot at Lake Placid, and kind of going back, the race I did before that was the half at Happy Valley. And I did the half at Happy Valley specifically because, like, the bike has, per 56 miles, I think it's actually more elevation than Lake Placid does.
Yeah.
And it's like a month before Placid, like timing is perfect, is like a last big dig. And I learned a lot about that. We adjusted my training based on how I did there heading into Placid. And, at Lake Placid, the things that I learned, I was fortunate. We showed up early. I think we drove up like the weekend before the race. It was, of course, like pouring cats and dogs the day we got there. But I rode the entire course once, just kind of like easy ride it, and then took specific sections of it and rode it several times.
Okay.
Like the Keen descent,
Yeah.
right? It's a long, mostly straight, fast, if you let it be fast, descent. And I'm like, I'm going to crush this, right? Like the only issue is safety and like
Yeah.
getting over that. And, like for me, like I'm a mom, like what goes through the front of my brain is like
A
those,
lot.
right? What happens to them if, something happens to me? And you have to kind of like push that out when you're on the course. And so, I had ridden the course once, and the first time I went down that, I think I was doing like 42 miles an hour. And I'm like, I do that around here. I'm comfortable with that speed. But I was like riding the brakes the whole time. And I knew that like there's so much more speed to be had in
Yeah.
that section. And, I'd read online and in all the Facebook groups and the Reddits and the this and that and the other thing, all of the like horror stories, like, oh, if you crash on that one, you're dead. And I'm like, okay, good to know. So I
Yeah.
won't remember it.
Yeah.
And the second time I rode it down, we were staying in Lake Placid. I rode the bike to Mount Van Hovenberg, did that first part of the route, went down the turnaround, came back around, rode up the hill, which the hill up is kind of annoying, like deceivingly steep.
Yeah.
It's not particularly steep, but like it feels steeper than it is.
Keeping in mind, this is all before race day.
Oh yeah. This was on like Wednesday before race day or Tuesday or something like that. And I wrote it down, and that time I was at like 46 or something. I'm like, okay. Then John, my now fiance, he, drove the car behind me.
Yeah.
And at the bottom of the descent, he met me. We loaded the bike up, drove back to Mount Van Hovenberg, and did it again.
What did you reach?
And that time I was at like 52. And then we did it again. And that time I was like 54. And on race day I was 56 on
Wow.
the first lap, and I think I was like 49 on the second lap, because on the second lap there was a woman who was kind of weaving. It was clear that she was like outside of her comfort zone. And it's like, in that case, you want it past, because if they fall, you don't want them to take you out.
Yeah.
Finding you have to make it so that you can pass them safely. And that like took a little bit of while. Anyways, so that was like one of the things. And thinking back on it, I was like, when you think about the bike course at Nice, a lot of it is flat. Some of it's at sea level, some of it's at 9,000 feet, but the majority of the course is flat rolling hills. We all know how to do flat and rolling hills. But there's like 20 some odd miles that on the map looks like it's pointed basically straight up. And then about the same number of miles that looks like it's pointed basically straight down. And so my training between Placid and Nice focused a lot on those two things.
So psychologically, let's just touch on that. Do you think that you almost Placid help you prepare not only physically but psychologically?
Yeah. So like where I live is not mountainous, but I can't ride 10 miles and not hit like 900,000 feet. So we've got elevation here. Where I live specifically, I live kind of in a valley.
Okay.
In southeast Pennsylvania, and you don't think of southeast PA as hilly, but it actually is.
Sure.
And yes, like hills aren't scary, but steep, long hills are really scary because we don't have those. Like the longest hill here that I can ride is maybe like half a mile long. It's not 20. So yeah, that was really intimidating. And then coming the opposite direction is like, I can clearly, based on what I just described from Placid, I can go fast in a straight line. That's called drag racing, right? What I don't have much experience with is going fast around sharp turns.
Corners, yeah, cornering.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's what I had to learn. And that's hard to learn, around here. So like, how do you do that? I don't know.
Well, with that, let's fast forward to race week. You arrive in Nice, you're in France, you're soaking in the atmosphere. Tell us what that experience was like.
It was a little different than I expected. The day that we showed up was rainy. So it was interesting. We arrived at the airport and they have the big I Love Nice sign. So we took some pictures in front of the big I Love Nice sign.
Did all the touristy things.
Did the touristy things. I think that picture might actually be like my most liked, hearted, favorited, whatever on Instagram to date, strangely.
Awesome. Yep.
I was all stressed out about like, okay, well, how do we get to the hotel? How do we get the bike to the hotel? I've never traveled overseas with a bike. And, the bike, if you've never traveled with one, is in this big unwieldy, I have a bike box Allen's. It's like this big plastic box with wheels. And, it turns out that the plane from Philadelphia to Nice, France, because it's direct, was like half triathletes.
Yeah, I can believe it.
We sat there on the plane watching box after bike box after bike box after bike box get loaded on.
That is what a world championship will do to you.
Right. And so we communally figured out how to use the trolley to
Yeah.
get to the hotel. And that first day we just kind of checked in the hotel, put our stuff up, and did the touristy thing, just explored, figured out, okay, where's the start line, where's swim start, most importantly, where's the food. And
I was going to say, first and foremost, the most important thing as a triathlete when you travel, not only domestically but internationally, let's be honest, it's seeing your bike, knowing that your bike has made it on the same aircraft is a huge relief. Yeah.
Yes, that's
Yes.
actually why I picked the flight I did, is because I'm
There you
like,
go.
it's direct. It
Yeah.
has less of a chance of getting lost, not getting there, or getting there broken.
Yeah. Do you put an air tag in the
I
bike
did an
bag?
tag in my bike, on my bike, and in my bike case.
There you go. Just in case. Extra
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. And two of them are Apple, and I forget the brand, but there's another one that shows up on Find My that's not Apple. So I'm
Okay.
like, in case one fails, I've got a backup.
There's plan A, B, and C. Contingency to the max.
Yeah, you'd never know that I spent 26 years as an engineer.
There you go. Well,
Yes, this is
that's
a good
awesome.
point. Yeah, the moment we got to the hotel room, bike box is open. Didn't assemble it until later, but it definitely got the inspection.
Good.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, did it make it in one piece? Yes, it did. Okay,
Yes.
now we can go do something fun.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. Let's upon your arrival, you've settled in. Did anything about the conditions or the course before the race surprise you?
Absolutely. So one of the things we noticed, so the day I told you, the day that we arrived there, it was raining. The Mediterranean right there. I've never swum in the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean right there is interesting. It can be rough and it can be smooth as glass. The day we arrived,
And it can be both.
it can be both. Yeah. The day we arrived, looking out the window, it was rainy, it was windy, the flags were all sideways. It almost looked like there was a whirlpool going on out there. The seas were like
Interesting.
exceptionally rough. I looked out the window. I'm like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? Luckily, the next day, I'm an early bird, went out in the morning to do, a shakeout jog. And by then I had assembled the bike and we are checking out the water. And then it was at like swim start time. It was smooth as glass.
Yeah.
You looked at it and you're like, oh my God, this is not the same body of water that it was yesterday.
It's radical. 24 hours later.
24 hours later.
Yeah.
And as the week went on, we noticed that the afternoons, it was really rough. And at times, there was some square currents going on out there. But in the mornings, it was generally pretty good.
Awesome.
So,
well, okay. So, yeah, it's nothing like some unforeseen.
Yeah. I did ride my bike, did several shakeouts. Unfortunately, that section of Nice is pretty flat. And I was hesitant to really explore the course outside of the town.
You want to make it to race day safely, right?
Yeah. And not knowing the area, I kind of understand French, but I mostly don't. So I was like, I don't want to be out here by myself, have something happen or get lost. And
yeah. Too often you train for months, you get to this momentous occasion and something silly, foolish happens, and that's not a place you want to find yourself in.
Yeah, I heard of several of those happening, and it's like, these are so expensive.
Yeah, super unfortunate.
And it's not just like the race entries, it's the getting there, the training leading up to, and most people are either in a constant training cycle or they're training for 12, 18 months for these things. And to show up and find out that your battery's not charged would be a problem.
And I think that's what's it's such a big deal, because if you think about the fact that some people, it's 5 years, 10 years in the making, it's not as easy or as smooth, and it's certainly not as quickly as you with your qualification process. For some people, that's several years in the making. So there's there's a lot riding on showing up in good health and being fit, capable, and able to race.
Yeah, and there's a woman that I know locally who, she qualified, she showed up, and she broke her foot on race day.
Oh
Like,
dear.
it's like those things you can't really foresee them, but
Yeah.
they ruin your week.
Super unfortunate and not uncommon, unfortunately. Let's talk emotions. Race day. Obviously, I mean, you tell me in your own words, but I would imagine that there is a big difference between the emotions you experienced at Ironman Lake Placid, obviously elevated and amplified at a world championship. Talk us through that.
Yeah, at Lake Placid, it was like, wow, we're here. We're actually going to do this thing.
Hmm.
And, there's that like emotion of like you've trained for so long for this, and then here's the start line. And I'm no stranger to start lines, but
Yeah,
that was a new start line. And, the distance between like in time between Placid and Nice is relatively small, right?
sure.
So, didn't get a chance to really recover from Lake Placid, had like a week of reduced intensity, part of which was just us driving back home. And then you're immediately back into training.
Yep.
And then, you get here and at the start line, you're like, this is something else. And you see 2,000 or more, women
Yeah,
who are at the top of their game.
yeah,
These are the best of the best age groupers. And, all have worked their ass off to get
yeah,
here.
sure.
And here we are. And it's like you get that moment. If you saw the pictures of me, like there were several that were like,
Yeah,
take the big deep breath and
yeah. Take
soak
it
it
all in.
and
Yeah,
let it
yeah,
escape. And you have to kind of do that, at least I do, to like not get overwhelmed by it at the start line. But then, once our feet hit the water, and my biggest, not fear, but anxiety of this race was not the mountain. It was not the ocean swim. It was definitely not the flat back and forth boring run. It was the start of the swim. I had
interesting.
never done a mass start like that before. I'm
Okay.
used to the rolling start. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm used to mass starts from running,
Yes.
but I've never had one where it's like by age group, go swim out to the buoy line, tread water for 2 or 3 minutes, and then the gun goes off.
It's an experience in and of itself.
It's different. And I
Yeah.
had like a lot of anxiety about that. And
Yeah.
we're the last age group, last age group to start. And it's like, so you got all the bike cutoffs and everything in the back of your head. And like, oh my God, you got that bike cutoff on the
Yeah.
hill going up. And maybe that's why I had such a good swim, is because in my head, I'm like, oh my God, I got to get past that first bike cutoff.
Let's talk about that in more detail. Let's talk about, we referenced the Mediterranean, or certainly talk about that swim. It was obviously a bit of chop. Talk us through that. Talk about swimming in the Mediterranean. What was that like? Outside of the mass start, let's talk about the swim itself.
It was a little different from like your average ocean swim. It's saltier. So, it was wetsuit legal. So the vast majority, not everyone, the vast majority of us were wearing wetsuits.
Sure.
It was Lake Placid. It was wetsuit legal, but not by a lot. So buoyancy, like you couldn't sink if you wanted to, kind of thing. So that helps. The thing so first, like the swim itself, there were some challenges. The buoys were much further apart than we're used to. Like I'm used to them being roughly every 100 yards or so apart. And, they were much further. I heard they were like 500. Doing the math doesn't make sense that they're quite that far given the number, but they were very far apart. And it was one of the
Jill,
things that
how did that affect your sighting, if you don't mind me asking, with regards to the distance?
Yeah, so sighting became really difficult because you are in the ocean. I mean, it's
Sure.
the Med, okay, but it's a massive body of water and it has the currents and the chop that you'd expect. Even though it was pretty calm that morning, there's still rise and fall. I was trying to time my sighting. So it was at the top of the swells, because if you're not at the top, a lot of times you couldn't see the next buoy.
Gotcha.
And that combined with the buoys were the same color in all directions. So
Interesting.
going, it's an M-shaped swim. So going out, going back on both legs were yellow,
Okay.
and then the red or orange turn buoys. So like you could see the turn buoys pretty clearly, but there were some occasions where I'm like, is that the next buoy for me, or is that on the other lane?
Yeah.
Because you
I can
couldn't
imagine.
quite tell the difference.
Yeah.
So we had received some advice from one of the pros ahead of time that sighting is easier on the way back if you sight to the town,
Yeah.
the buildings
Yeah.
instead of sighting the buoys.
The
And
shoreline. Yeah.
for me, like that was hugely helpful.
Game changer.
Yeah, and I did the practice swim, which like I'm so thankful I did because like the practice swim was such a great experience because it's like
Just help settle the nerves, get acclimated, get familiar.
I wasn't discovering on race day how to sight when the buoy is 4 to 5 times further away than I'm used to it being. Yeah,
For sure. Okay, well, you had a fantastic swim in spite of the conditions and the sighting issues that you experienced.
I did,
You did
but
indeed.
I really had fun with it. And like the pictures of me coming out of the water, I felt like the
Yeah.
big smile on my face because I both knew that I crushed it,
Yeah.
and I was like legitimately having fun.
And you felt good.
I did.
Yeah.
Now, talking to other women who did the same swim, started with me, depending on like how far you fell behind the leaders, you may have had a very different swim. Like I talked to
For
a
sure.
few ladies who they were in the water when the tide was starting to change,
Yeah.
and they felt that like the second half was very tough. So I think like how you perceived the swim to some degree
Different.
what differs like based on like not just like where you started but kind of your pace. Once that tide starts changing, like everything changes.
I think evidently that's always the case. Time of day, which wave you're in, I think all it plays a huge role in
Absolutely.
how your swim goes,
Which
and
is the
how
nice
that
thing,
differs.
right? Which is the nice thing with like the whole age group starting as once, like instead of the normal self-seating stuff, it's like,
Yeah.
all right, well, we all theoretically had the same experience
There
versus
you
like
go.
if my age group is spread out across an hour of people starting, the
Yeah.
person starting in the second wave may have a very different experience than the person starting in the eighth.
Yeah. Okay, well, now we're onto the bike, and you obviously, I mean, it goes without saying, you're aware of over 8,000 feet of climbing, right? You mentally prepared. You were psychologically, you knew what you had to do.
I did.
Let's talk through that because psychologically preparing for something isn't always the same as experiencing it in reality. And so I'm curious as to that differentiation, or certainly how it was for you.
So first, my bike computer, a Garmin, told me that it was 9,300 feet.
Oh wow.
My watch, also a Garmin, a Phoenix 8, told me it was 9,800 feet.
Oh wow.
So, no matter how you look at it, it was a big climb. Yeah, it's really intimidating. Like looking at it on paper. Anyone who's doing the course, like talking to people who have done it in the past, is hugely useful. In this case, the race director did a few walkthroughs for different groups. I thought all those were hugely useful. I was
I
like
was going to
trying to
say
gather.
massively helpful.
Yeah, especially like on a course with like this. Lake Placid's 2 laps. And, to me, like, all right, go out, spend 2 or 3 hours doing 56 miles at a moderate pace, like, isn't so intimidating to ride the course. But
Yep.
when it's one big loop, like doing a century a couple of days before race day doesn't sound like a good idea. At least for me, it's not. Like I can
Yep.
do centuries,
Yep.
but doing one like 3, 4 days before race day is probably not top of my list of things to do. So yeah, that the thing that intimidated me the most was, like I said, was not the climb. It was the way back down.
Was the descent.
It was the descent. I think a lot of people were really worried about that.
Yeah.
And looking at it on the maps, it's like all these switchbacks. And then you look at the map versus the elevation, and you're like, wow, you've got some speed going through those switchbacks. I was fortunate enough that, I had bumped into a few of the pros here and there. And one of them, I had expressed that I was kind of nervous about those. And she gave me same advice I've heard 1,000 times, but it stuck through my head the entire race, which was look where you're going, not
Yes.
where you've been, right?
Yep.
It's like look ahead.
Yes.
Uh, I used to drive on occasion, our Mustang on the local, racetrack. And it was the
Yeah.
same thing in those schools, right? It's like, look where you want to go, not at the ground in front of you. And it was the same thing. I'm like, the first turn is actually, the first downhill switchback is actually on the way up the hill. It like goes up and then goes down, then goes up some more. And that one was like, wow, that
Yeah.
really works. Like,
Yeah.
that's awesome. And, you do a few of those and got a lot of confidence. So by the time we were on the downhill, I was like really attacking them. I had a lot of speed coming down. And the course team, they did a good job of marking like where you needed to slow down. And so I kind of got it in my head. I'm like, well, if I don't see those orange caution marks, there's probably not a lot of reason to massively slow down. And I didn't. Now, I did talk to a number of folks who, people I know, people I don't know and have run into, who DNF'd on the bike. Almost everyone I talked to DNF'd on the downhill. And it was those switchbacks. Like, a lot of people were really nervous about them.
Yeah.
It's like, at least where we live on the East Coast, there's not a lot of places you can go to practice at.
Let's dive into some of the specifics here with regards to your setup, because and specifically your wheels. Let's touch on that.
Troy, this is the conversation we had the other day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
what would I change?
there's good reason I bring this up, because there's a lot of listeners who will be paying close attention to what you have to share. So let's talk about your setup and then why you opted to go that route.
All right. So first, I race on a 2023 speed concept. So like the latest version. And, it's a fast bike. There's other fast bikes too. I brought with me a zip disc and two 858 zip wheels. So I wasn't quite sure, like, do I run a disc? It's got the weight. Do I run, do I run the carbon wheels, instead of the disc? I didn't have any skinny wheels with me.
It's too late. It's too late for that.
Yeah. You've got limited place to pack this stuff. And, I had made the decision, based on everything I knew about the course, that I was going to, race with the speed concept. And a lot of people made the opposite decision to race with a road bike. And the reason why I decided to stick with my tri bikes, because I looked at the course and I'm like, there's like 70 plus miles of the course is either downhill or flat-ish, rolling hills.
I think it's so important that you mention that, Jill, because I think people lose sight of those specifics because the primary focus is the elevation gain.
Yeah.
But you took the time, the engineer in you took the time to analyze that course, break it down, and that is how you systematically made a decision with regards to the bike that you were going to and the wheel set. You meant business. You were bold, but you weren't playing games.
Well, I wasn't. And, this is my first world championship, but I wasn't going to just finish. I wanted to go and like do as best I could.
Given an account of yourself.
Yeah. And not everything went the way I had hoped. Not everything went to plan. In retrospect, you learn something new from every race. This one, so race day, I did run the disc, and in retrospect, I feel like, definitely I felt the weight going up, right? Did it slow me down going up? Sure it did. I still passed a lot of people going up the hill, and a lot of people passed me going up the hill. Ultimately, looking at the full 112 miles, I benefited from having the disc more than I would have not having it.
In spite of the conditions, because let's touch on those. There was some wind. Am I wrong?
There was, and what I was describing to you yesterday or the other day, whenever we talked, was there's a perspective on like the effect that the wind has. Yeah. If you're used to cycling in like wide open areas, it's that kind of wind coming across a field, coming across the plains, where there's really nothing to stop it or slow it down.
No shelter. Yeah.
No shelter. Yeah, most of the time the wind was hitting us kind of from the side, so like it doesn't really slow you down. There is a fairly long out and back that's a somewhat negative false flat going out, and it's a positive false flat coming back. On this race day, the direction that the wind was blowing, like I said, most of the time it was hitting from the side. This out and back was in the exact right direction that coming back up that slight grade. And it was, it's not a huge grade. I mean, you're talking like 1.5 or 2%. Like it's not
Sure.
big. You felt that wind on that like
Yes, I
three,
can
four,
imagine.
five, however many miles it was.
Yes.
The rest of the course was fine. You felt the wind kind of blowing at you from the side, but the rest of the time. But uh, my bigger issue at the top of that mountain was just the temperature change.
Sure.
It was a little damp. It was, I won't say rainy, but it was a little drizzly
Yeah.
at times, and so you just like feel cold.
I was going to say, were you cold?
It was. I know some people had like stuffed solar blankets, down their jerseys, and
Yeah.
other people had, put on extra layers, and I chose not to because I'm like, you got that going up the hill part, and
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but it could be almost any temperature, and going up that hill, I'm going to be one sweaty pig, right? So the idea of having like a solar sheet,
Yeah.
a heat
Yeah.
blanket
Yeah.
under my tri-suit, just like,
Too much.
I was like passing out just thinking about it. But yeah, it was pretty cold at the top. It did warm up like as we started descending again, but that you're up there for quite some time.
The
So
burning question I have for you is like, now you've conquered that bike course.
uh-huh.
You've what were those legs like coming off the bike?
Well, before we get to that, I want to finish answering your other question. So like bike setup,
Oh yes.
what we talked about was, I had the 858s up front.
There you go.
Doing it again, I probably would do something skinnier up.
It's great advice.
Yeah, not for the weight, just like with that
The
side wind.
crosswinds.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
I'm good with the disc with the wind, but having it on both sides, you just kind of like feel a little bit unstable. Yeah, so like getting off the bike onto the run, I was feeling the last maybe 5 or 6 miles on the bike. I was feeling a bit queasy, like sick to the stomach. And I think what happened was my nutrition going up was not what it needed to be.
Okay.
Yeah, as you're going up, you're sweating to death. And it was pretty cool. So I wasn't really thinking about like hydration, and I wasn't really thinking about like gels. And so I know I missed a couple of gels that I otherwise would have taken. I have like a 20-minute timer on my computer. And I know that I didn't drink as much going up as I had expected. So I think what happened there, talking to some folks, a lot of folks afterwards, because that's now 2 races that's happened on.
Yeah.
Lake Placid, it happened, but further into the run. It's like 14, 15. I think what happened, it sounds pretty clear that I took in too much electrolytes, most likely. And that electrolyte, having too much electrolytes kind of makes you a little bit seasick.
Nauseous. Yeah.
So legs were actually okay coming off the bike. You got that long downhill, and I tend to spin pretty fast. So I was spinning, in the low 90s, probably coming down the hill. And that to me is super helpful. Like I had a lot of speed on that last like 10K or whatever it is from the base of the descent to transitioned. Although it always cracks me up, that last like mile, everyone's like preparing to get off your bike, and you're like, you're still in a race, guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like keep moving. You're not
Yeah.
at dismount yet.
Yeah.
So, I'm like, I'm gonna put power down until dismount time. Yeah, so the run, I did not have the run I expected to have. I'm not a hugely fast runner. I'm not slow. I usually run a marathon around 4 plus or minus, say like 350 to 420, like somewhere in that range. And that run was like 5 something, I think. And it was 2 things. Actually, no, it was 1 thing. It was nutrition. It
And
came
that
down.
it's a domino effect, right? Like what happened on the bike is ultimately going to affect. And again, I'm really glad that you're being vulnerable and you're sharing transparently what took place, because it's not an isolated incident, because so often we make the mistake and ultimately you end up paying the price in the very next discipline. And like I said, domino effect. So what happened on the bike, you carried onto the run, the nausea, the discomfort. So that, that obviously has a major effect on your performance, and
Yeah,
the run
and
leg.
And the endurance athlete in me is like, just like trudge forward, work through it. It'll be fine. And, I finished. I finished about 45 minutes to an hour later than I expected to. My goal was 12:30 to 13, and I was 13 and a half, I guess. And at Placid, I think I was like 12:15 or something.
It's good that you give that comparison, but still an incredible achievement given that it was your first world championship.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I mean, I still had a
You
lot
can be
of
very
fun.
proud of yourself.
Still had a lot of fun. I look forward to doing it again, hopefully next year. Of course, got to qualify for it again.
Yeah.
But no, I think, what I learned on that run was, nutritionally, like, I've spent the last 6 months, like, trying to figure out, like, electrolyte. And I've done a lot of, and now I'm a triathlon and endurance coach. And, there's a lot of resources available,
For sure.
like, how do you dial that in?
Yeah.
And the problem is, like, it's very individual, right?
Yeah.
Like, I have a fairly high sweat rate. So you'd expect that I need more electrolytes, but there's a lot of conflicting information out there on, like, at what rate do you replenish it? And same thing on energy, what is the right rate? And you hear all sorts of numbers being thrown around. If you pop into any of the Facebook groups or any of the triathlon groups
Be careful. Be
anywhere,
careful. Yeah.
it's like buyer beware,
There's
because
a
like
lot of advice.
you'll hear everything from like
Yes.
take peanut butter and jelly sandwiches with you, which probably works for some people. To me, the idea of carrying peanut butter and jelly around with me on a race is not very appealing.
It might have started out as a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. What you ingest when that time comes could be far from what started out as a sandwich.
Yeah, by the end of the bike, I have a picture that the sandwich bag is more like a like a frosting bag.
Yeah, I was going to say it could be a lot of things, but I think Jill, what's important for our listeners to understand is that you're so right. It's not a one size fits all. It is very individualized. And secondly, it's super important to highlight the fact that you're continuously learning, right? Trial and error. You've got to figure out what works and what works for you. And you've been doing that over the past 6 months. You obviously knew what worked really well and you knew what didn't. But that's something that continues to, as you continue to evolve, you continue to learn.
And that's one of the problems with endurance sports, I think, is you're constantly chasing, like dialing it in, but at the same time, our bodies are changing because we're
Yeah.
getting older every moment of every day, right?
Yeah.
Our health changes, especially for women, as we get older, things change. Like dialing it in is like this elusive thing. It's like for me, it's taking like, what did I learn the last race and how do I do it better the next one? Right.
Yeah.
Versus like chasing perfection.
Yeah. And I think, Jill, as we're both Ironman certified coaches, I think it's important for our listeners to understand that you also need to allow enough time for something to work. Continuously changing the stimulus is not always optimal, right? Like jumping from one thing to the next can be more detrimental. And I think that's also important to mention.
Absolutely. And I'll go back to the running crowd. Nutrition on runs is all over the place. And I'm very active in like the Run Disney community. They have like all these races every year, and you get everyone going to these, from people who have never run a 5K to, people who are, Boston qualifiers who are running it because it's an off-season race. And, the advice that gets thrown out there is equally all over the place, from people who are like, well, on a marathon, I don't take any nutrition. And both the runner in me and the coach is like, that's not a great idea. And to the other end, where it's like, no, you should be taking like 90 to 100 grams in every hour. And it's like, for the average person, 90 to 100 grams is going to make them either puke or it's going to go out the other end.
It's overload. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because most of us can't digest it that fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or if we can, it has to be metered in a way that we can digest it, right? Then same thing with hydration. It's like, drink to thirst. Well, there's a lot of evidence out there that drink to thirst is, was the rage in the 80s, but today we know better.
Oh, it's changed radically.
Right. Right. And then electrolytes, right? From like, no, every water stop, take the electrolyte, to no, you should never take the electrolyte, and to everything in between. As like, there's so much out there, and most of it's what worked for that person and not backed by like research and science. So that was one of the reasons why I actually had initially started working down certification paths. Was like, it makes me a better athlete to know more about these things.
Absolutely.
And then when I decided to start a coaching business, it's like, now, like, okay, to my athletes, I'm like, do
You
what
can
works
help
for
others.
you,
Yeah.
but here's like what the science says. Here's the current thinking,
Yeah.
right? And the current thinking changes, right? Last year we thought this was a good idea, but we've since learned that it's not, right?
Yeah.
So
No,
there's some of that too.
very valid. Okay, now this momentous occasion, and you've heard it before. You are an Ironman. That profound statement is, if you've never heard it, it's hard to articulate what you feel in that moment. And we've both experienced it. It's very special. It's very unique. But talk us through that moment, and you can highlight what happened after that. But specifically crossing the finish line, let's talk about the difference in terms of crossing a world championship finish line v crossing a regular Ironman, which in and of itself is a huge achievement. But for most and for many, not everybody gets to cross a world championship finish
So,
line.
like, first we have to recognize that, like, the statement itself is somewhat absurd, right? A regular Ironman. It's like, this is something that such a small percentage of people actually do,
Yeah. Yeah.
and an even infinitesimally smaller percentage does more than once. And my goal is to, find people to help coach them so that they can do it more than once. That first time, you run down the finisher chute, you stop and ring the bell, right? It's your first time doing it. It's a PR by definition.
Yeah,
You
it is.
you ring the first time bell, and then you continue, and there's the finish line with the big board, the big Ironman, art, and with all the screens, and your time and name are right there.
Yeah. It's
Jill
huge.
Bartholomew
Yeah.
and my time.
Yeah.
Or
Did you
Troy
get any
Tatum
fireworks?
and your time. Was that?
Did you get any fireworks?
No,
Pyrotechnics? No?
no pyrotechnics. I mean, in my head.
Okay. Well, there was something else that happened. You want to share?
We'll get to that. But you ask, like, what does it feel like, right? That first
Yeah.
time you go across, it's like an overwhelming emotion. And it's so contradictory because you just spent 10 plus hours, most people more than 12 hours, most people more than 14 hours to
Yeah.
get to the finish line. And you are exhausted.
You, as a human being, you've just covered 140.6 miles. Which,
Assuming you biked, swam, and ran good lines.
yes, so true. So true.
And it's such an overwhelming sensation, an emotion when you hear the announcer, you are an Ironman. And at the same time, like, you're so physically exhausted, but it's the adrenaline that creates is like, oh my God. And you saw me at Lake Placid, like, I didn't collapse, but I could have, and I would have been happy to. Nice was a very special finish for me. I ended up running the last probably 5, 7, 10, not 10, maybe like K, with this woman from the UK. And we follow each other on Instagram still.
Awesome.
And, comment occasionally on stuff. And, she was kind of having a rough time. I was kind of having a rough time. And, we kind of talked each other to the finish line.
Roughed it out together.
And about a kilometer from the finish line, I said to her, I'm like, I have a feeling that John is going to do something stupid at the finish line. I think were my exact words. And, I'm coming down the finisher chute, and the energy there at the World Championship, like Placid, the energy was insane. World Championship, it was like insane on steroids.
Yeah.
And, there it's after dark. It's that much later in the season and that much, different latitude that, like, for most people, they finished after dark. And you're coming down the finish line, high-fiving people in the finisher chute. It was great. And then, I hear my name. And as I hear my name, you are an Ironman, I see Audra in front of me, right? Audra from Ironman Foundation. And she grabs me as soon as I cross the finish line. The official race photos have her butt in them and pulls me to the side. And first of all, if you've ever run a marathon, much less an Ironman, what's the worst thing you can do after you've put in a race effort? It's stop, right?
Yeah.
Right? So there I am. You can see the pictures and there's video of it on the side. And then I look over and there's John. And they bring me over there because at this point we're not blocking the finish line, but we're kind of blocking the finish line. And, he gives me the medal, blah, blah, blah. And then he gets down on one knee and he proposes.
Awesome.
So we got engaged at the finish line of Ironman World Championship in Nice. So in the span of 3 minutes, I heard, Jill Bartholomew, you are an Ironman. And will you marry me?
Congratulations. Very special. Jill, looking back, what was, for our listeners, what was your biggest lesson, your biggest takeaway for all those men who are thinking of qualifying this year and who have qualified to race in Nice?
Yeah. I'm one person. It's one perspective. I raced it. I did the best I could. My advice, I was telling you earlier, I was in Chicago at a Triad Pool School event, and we were sitting down at dinner, and I was talking to a bunch of guys who were competing, and they were kind of interrogating me, what to expect. And I think word on the street is wrong, right? The word on the street is, oh my God, it's such a hard course. It is a hard course. It's World Championship. It's supposed to be hard.
Sure.
Kona is hard. Nice is hard. Is it harder? In different ways. The thing is, it's not all about the elevation, right? There's a lot of gain, but it's all at once, right? It's not like another course. It's not like, say, Lake Placid, where you have a bunch of gain and then 56 miles later you have a bunch of gain again, right? You have a bunch of gain and then mile 89 or something, there's a couple of mile uphill that when you're looking at it kind of looks like a wall, but you'll get past the bike course. And the swim was great. The water was great to swim in. The energy is different than anything I've felt before. It's not Kona, but it's its own thing. And the people in France are great. They love having the people there. I swear to God that there is 3 pizza places for every non-pizza place in that town. I have never seen so many pizza places in my life, and we're mostly Italian.
Was it good? Did you try?
It was. We ate at a different place every day. I think we had pizza every day.
Okay.
Pizza or pasta, and it was good. There was this little place that we really liked. The pizza actually came out uncut, which we weren't expecting.
Okay.
And they gave us a little dinner knife, like a butter knife.
Fun.
It's got a serrated edge, but it's kind of like a faux serrated. It's serrated, but it's not going to do anything useful. But that was probably the best pizza we had. But it was all good. It was expensive.
When in Nice, right?
Yeah,
it's experiential.
It is. We didn't spend too much of our time being super touristy, which I'm thankful for. Yeah. But advice to the guys doing it this year is train for hills, but don't train just for hills. You got to go down them too.
Yeah.
But the run is a bit boring, but it's flat. So don't worry about the run.
I was going to say, you pick up from the energy and the surroundings and the fact that it's a world championship event.
And the run had people lining it wall to wall the entire distance. It was amazing.
Awesome. Well, the big question, will we see you at another world championship?
You will. Okay. My race season this year is super full. I'm going to be at Texas in a couple weeks.
There you go.
And Texas at this point is a get finished race. I had some injuries and the flu over the winter, so I'm not kind of where I had expected to be. Be back at Lake Placid this year is such an amazing race, and I'm going to Kona. So
there you go.
I'll be there twice this year, actually.
Well, Jill, your story is truly inspiring, and I'm so grateful that I got to be part of this podcast and where we could dive into all the details and share the highs, the lows, and everything in between. So thank you for sharing your journey with us.
Well, thanks, Troy, for helping me out. And yeah, you helped get me across the finish line at Lake Placid. I remember coming up the hill, on the run, and like the run at Lake Placid isn't bad. It's not flat, but
No,
like it doesn't have a lot of hills in it. But it's got the one in Main Street, and I grew up in upstate New York. I spent a lot of time speed skating on the oval as a kid. I know that hill, and
yeah,
it's a steep hill, right? And I remember like being at just about the top of it, and there's Troy, hand in the air. You got this, girl. You got this. That's right. That's right. You got a strategy. Go do it. And at the time I was like, someone cares. That's awesome.
it's just being in the right place when it matters most, right? When you're digging deep. That's an episode for another day, finding fuel in an empty tank. But you showed a lot of determination, a lot of willpower and resilience, and you pressed on and you got it done, and you
Wow.
qualified for the Ironman World Championship.
Yeah, I mean, world championship or not, you still need the tenacity to stick with it and
Yeah,
to fit that training in your schedule and to, show up to race day as best you know how and to run the best race that you're able to. I mean, these
yeah.
are not easy things. These are things that most people look at and say, "What is wrong with you?"
Yeah, I think that's what's so unique about the sport of triathlon is that you are going to be dealt a hand. And that hand may be a good one, but more often than not, it's not a good hand. And your ability to overcome obstacles and challenges is what determines your success and your outcome.
Yeah. I mean, nothing ever goes the way that you plan it on race day.
Very seldomly, right?
Right, right. I'm like, it doesn't matter if you're running 100 meters or if you're running 140 miles. Nothing goes to plan exactly. So I think, for me, having the benefit of having done a lot of like running races and, yeah, that was my first world championship. I've done probably a half a dozen or more 70.3s, but a bunch of other races too. It's like you kind of learn how to kind of go with the flow a little bit. It's like you got your plan, but like your stomach doesn't feel good. So like, what do you do? Right. And one of my big learnings this year was like, if you feel like you're going to puke, you probably should just do it.
Yeah. I think that's my best advice to our listeners is that in every situation and circumstance, you always have a choice. And ultimately you decide, right? And you can embrace it and you can see it as a roadblock or you can see it as an opportunity. But either way, you have a choice.
That's right. And learn as you go. I always find it like interesting when you think back and do that night, you're like, oh my God, I'm never going to do this again. And then how am I signing up for another race before I'm home? And, you start playing back the race and how you felt and, why you felt that way. And it's really easy to be like, it didn't go my way that day, but you control a lot more than you give yourself credit for too. It's like, yeah, and you can't control the current.
Yeah.
You can't control the dude that decided he needed to swim over you and gave you a black eye on the course. And that is a
Yeah.
true story. I have
Yeah.
come out of many courses with black eyes. Knock on wood, haven't lost goggles yet, but I've been punched, I've been kicked. It's a rough sport in the water. You can't control that, but you can control how you react to it.
Yeah. How you respond.
It's like
Yeah.
it's like everything else in life, right? How you react to things define you. And it's like the bike. Yeah. Okay, you hit a pothole, you got a flat. I raced the Chattanooga 70.3 last year, and I was having an incredible bike. So I showed up, I was trained, I was right at my peak. It was perfect. The first 20 miles of that bike were a PR and my chain broke. So there I am. I had an amazing swim. My first 20 miles on the bike was fantastic. And there I am on the side of the road, sitting on my butt, watching the slow people go by, waiting for the guy to show up so he can take a link out of my chain so we can put it back together again. And it's like, you can't control that.
You can't. And you had a choice. You could have called it a day there and then. You could have said, right, I'm done. My day is done. But you chose and you decided to carry on.
Well, and now it's like events like that define you because now I'm like, okay, I can tell you every tool that I have in my bike on race day because of stuff that's happened to me in the
There you
past
go.
or to people I know, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I never would have thought to bring a chain breaker with me.
Yeah.
But having sat on the road for the better part of 90 minutes, waiting for a guy with a stupid little simple tool who then tried to talk me out of continuing the race. He wanted
Yeah.
me to put it up. And I was like, no, I came this far. And I
Yeah.
asked him, I said, when's the bike cutoff for the next? And I think there was like, I think it was like 5 miles away from the next bike cutoff. And I had like maybe 20 minutes. And I was like, okay, we got this. If you take and that bike, like I powered through it. And he's like, well, you can't use half your cassette. I'm like, that's fine. I need 3 gears for this race.
Well, moral of the story, you'll never race without that chain breaker ever again.
Well, right. And, it's like you learn, but now it's like, it's a good story. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
I raced this race and I got to sit. I had a first-hand view, front row seat for all the bikers going through.
There you go. We live and we learn.
Yeah.
Well, Jill, it's been an absolute pleasure. And to our listeners that have enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and share. You would be doing both Jill and I a huge favor. And until next time, thank you, Jill Bartholomew.
Yeah, thanks, Troy, for co-hosting today, and I'm sure we'll do more together. And for our listeners, this is our first episode. I hope you enjoyed what you heard. I hope it was useful. Let us know. Was it useful? Is it what you want to hear? What topics would you like us to cover? Like, I've got my own ideas. Troy's got his own ideas, but you're the ones who are listening. What do you want to hear about? What's useful? And
Awesome.
so this is a perspective from both coaches and age group athletes. We're not elite athletes, we're age groupers
Yeah.
who happen to have some success from time to time. What do you want to hear about? All right. Thanks.